Welcome back to the Art of Dialogue. We have a returning guest, William Lesane, the cousin of Tupac Shakur. The last time you were on, uh, it was a great interview. The people responded well to it. Uh, Welcome back to the Art of Dialogue. It's a pleasure to have you.
Man, it's a pleasure to be here. What's good, Delray? Good to see you again.
Oh man, one day at a time. Let's get right into it. In our last interview, you made controversial statements about King Tut, saying that based on what a friend had told you in prison, that he was responsible for the shooting of your cousin Tupac Shakur. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, very good question, man. I'm glad that you asked me that because I wanted to elaborate on it. First of all, shout out to King Tut, man. Welcome home. I'm glad that you free. Um, and I got to say, during the time when I was told what I shared on the Art of Dialogue the last time I was here, that a person that I knew from my past had told me that Tut actually shot Pac. When he told me that, it was completely believable, because of the way things were at the time. Remember, this is 1993, you know what I'm saying? So the reputation that King Tut had at the time, the way things was moving in New York, the chance meeting of the person who told me, who I knew, it all made sense to me at the time. And throughout the years, I still believed it because I didn't hear the other side of the story. In other words, I didn't hear anything from King Tut. I didn't hear anybody with contrary information against what I believed, which was that Tut shot Tupac. Fast forward to now, currently, uh, King Tut came home and he did a video with his wife. I didn't know that the video was out. It was on YouTube. But a friend of mine who was very close to us and know the story called me and asked me, he said, hey, Bill, did you see the video King Tut did on YouTube? I said, no. He said, man, I want you to check it out because I don't think he did it. I said, really? He said, yeah, but check it out for yourself. So I went home and sure enough, man, I checked the video out and immediately I knew that I was wrong in the information that I spread it. I knew that I was wrong. I knew that I was wrong because, first of all, the way that he explained his side of the story was completely honest, forthright, forthcoming, and the tone in how he was describing his affinity for Tupac, his affinity for my family, his affinity for the struggle, for the Black Panther Party. I thought it was like, wow, this guy's being completely honest. He's actually bearing his soul, So that kind of made me realize that I was wrong. If I may, I want to share how I was able to translate that to King Tut personally. Is that okay?
Exactly. Go ahead.
So, and by the way, his wife, man, shout out to his wife. His wife is amazing at what she does, because she was the one that was interviewing King Tut as he was telling his story. And she was asking him pertinent questions, that would have made a guilty person uncomfortable. You know what I'm saying? But the questions that she was asking him was just rolling off of him in a way that was completely authentic. He was
So,
answering,
so,
yeah.
so let me ask you this. So, what was one of the questions that she asked King Tut that convinced you that he was not involved uh, with the shooting of your cousin Tupac Shakur at Quad Studio?
It was very clear. It was the first, when she got to the part of the interview where she started discussing Tupac, the very first question was, I'm paraphrasing, was to the effect that it's been rumored that you had something to do with the ambush of Tupac Shakur. God bless. She said, rest in peace to the late, great Tupac Shakur. That's how she framed it. Rest in peace. She said that after all, Tupac had named you in a song, as someone that shot him. And I guess she said something, how do you feel about that, or something to that effect, right? I'm paraphrasing. And from that point on, as Tut was explaining his position and how he felt about it, is when I realized that I was wrong the whole time. And that I wish that I would have had the opportunity to, I can't say uh, verify the information that I was given in 1993, because, like I said, the times dictated the information. It kind of made the information that I received in prison likely that it was true. There was going to be no way that I was going to be able to decipher the information that I was given to determine that Tut wasn't the shooter. You just got to understand the context. It was the time. It was his reputation. It was the outrage that Pac had been ambushed. You know, the fact that I'm in jail. I should have been with him. All these things played into my thinking at the time. So it would have been pretty much impossible to decide otherwise. But after hearing him do the interview and clarifying his position and the fact that he wasn't the shooter, why he wasn't the shooter, why he would have never done it in the first place, is dope. It was all I needed to hear. And by the way, Delray, also understand this. You know, this is 1993. I'm 61 years old. At the time, I was in my early 30s. Tut and I are the same age. We come from the same background. 1960s, 70s, New York City. We come from the same school of thought. You understand? So just by us having that type of connection also made it easier for me to realize that this guy was being completely honest. Because after all, he didn't have to do the interview in the first place. He didn't have to bare his soul about something that he never was involved in. But he decided that he wanted to do it, and it was very convincing to me. I believed him completely.
Well, you know, I find that very interesting that you would be man enough to come back and apologize and reconcile with Tut. I actually spoke to Tut on the phone myself, him and his wife, and this is unrelated to you, but in part related to you, because they wanted me to they wanted your number. And my thing was, I felt like, you know what, that really is not my business to do that, and like to reach out to you. And but they had already reached out to you. So I think it's very interesting that you know, decided to come out and apologize for that. And you know, from that perspective, I think that makes a bigger man of you. And if only, like you said, if you could look back 30 some odd years, 29 years, and it could have went a different way, maybe things would have went different for Tupac.
Well, things would have went different for Tut, because, mind you, he had to bear the burden of being known as the person who ambushed Tupac in the studio in New York City. You know what I'm saying? That can be stressful in itself, on top of having 5 life sentences, you know, that he's doing consecutively for a crime that he didn't do. You know, on top of that, even further, someone like me accusing him based on erratic information, right? Based on erratic information, accusing him of actually shooting Tupac, right? I felt responsible in a way for adding on to the confusion around what happened with Tupac in New York City, you know? And that was the last thing I wanted to do. Because one thing that I can say about myself, man, is that I always try to be forthcoming and honest about what I say, how I treat people, you know, I'm not the kind of guy to create confusion. You feel me? So it was my duty to correct that wrong. And I haven't apologized. I apologized to him personally over the phone. By the way, he was completely great. Man, check this out. You're right. When Tut came out, we were both trying to reach out to each other. When I found out he came home, I wanted to reach out to him. I reached out to a gentleman by the name of Brian Glaze Gibbs. Shout out to Brian Glaze Gibbs. He has a podcast on YouTube. I reached out to him because he and Tut grew up together. And I asked him to set up an interview on his platform so that I can tell the world, that I was completely wrong, or I may have been wrong. At the time, I was saying I may have been wrong about Tut. Then I saw the video that he and his wife produced on YouTube. And after I saw that video, I became completely convinced that I was wrong. So during that time, we was communicating, trying to get up. Long story short, we finally talked on the phone. First thing I did was I apologized for what I said about him. And he immediately understood. He was completely gracious about what I said. He understood completely because he understood the context. He understood the time. He understood what his reputation was. And after our first conversation, man, I wanted to be his friend. I'm going to even lie. I wanted to be his friend. Then later on, watching him and his wife on their podcast, noticing this drastic transformation that he has undergone. He's a totally different man now, and his message is the message that us as Black men need to hear. We need to hear messages of redemption, messages of transformation, messages of spiritual growth, personal development, because all of us have histories that we rather not remember. But if we can transform ourselves to be totally different people than who we were in our past, it's powerful. And obviously, I naturally gravitated towards his message. So I wanted to be his friend. And not only his friend, but also collaborate with him on whatever projects that he's working on and reaching out to young men who are dealing with the same issues that we dealt with in our young age, running the streets as savages, barbaric, taken from people, taking advantage of people. I've done that too. And my message and Tut's message is the same. We want to reach out to young men who may be undergoing the same issues that we were dealing with back in our younger days, and let them know that we can all change and we can be better people, and we can have better, our behaviors can be different, that we have potential, that we can reach any level of success that we want to, that we have opportunities to make better decisions. We don't have to take advantage of other people. We don't have to become the scourges of our community, that we can be beacons in our community. And that's his message. So how I'm not going to gravitate towards that. You know what I'm saying? It was all good, man. Shout out to him.
I totally understand. So basically, there were a couple of lyrics mentioned in the 50 Cent song. And Tupac mentioned King Tut's name in Against All Odds. In the song, he rapped, "Now you gotta watch your back, now watch your front. Here we come, gunshots to Tut, now you stuck." How do you feel about being responsible for Tupac saying those words about Tut, as well as 50 Cent, because it was the message that you had gave to Tupac, along with some other people Tupac had mentioned, that my cousin had told me, for the people who don't know, that my cousin had told me that King Tut was the one that was responsible for the shooting. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I feel like, I erroneously made an error. Now, yes, it weighs on my conscience, but also, as I've said, that was where my mind was at the time. 30-something years ago, and I explained the context of why my mind was where it was at. I explained all that. So, yeah, I did feel immensely responsible for it. But what helped me get over it, and what helped me deal with it better than I normally would have dealt with it, was the graciousness that I got from Tut when I spoke to him. He wasn't carrying any grudges. He didn't have any hard feelings against me. He was completely forgiving because he too understood the context of how I received that information. He admitted to me that I understand why you thought that, because I was that guy. I wore for in the first interview that we did, I described the person who shot Pac as a person who was wearing fatigues at the time as he waited outside for Pac to come into the studio, right? And he had his head down, he had a cap over his eyes. And Tut admitted to me during our conversation that, of course, he used to, and I knew this because I used to see, Tut was known for wearing fatigues. So that was one reason why when the guy told me in jail who shot Tut, that was one reason why I thought it was him immediately. I believed it. Another reason why was because, as we all know, Tut's reputation was that of a stick-up kid, and he was from Brooklyn. And at the time, Pac was having issues with niggas from Brooklyn. You know what I'm saying? We know who they are, and that was another reason why I would. And then on top of that, the person who told me this information in jail back in 1993 is a person that Tut and I both know. When I spoke to Tut, I told him who the person was. He was like, yeah, I know him. I remember him, blah, blah, blah. And he said, man, I forgive him too. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like, dude, it was like the man obviously understood just as well as I did that it was an erroneous accusation that didn't stem from malice or jealousy or anger. It just stemmed from misinformation, by two people who he both knew. He didn't know me as well as he knew the person that told me, but he knew who I was, as he remembered who I was when we spoke, and he knew the guy who told me. But like I said, he forgave us both. It was unfortunate. It was an unfortunate thing to happen. But as I said, the context at the time dictated it in a way. Put it this way. The context, the circumstances, the timing was more of the reason why I believe Tut did it than me actually believing that he did it. You get what I just said? It was all those things combined that was more of a reason why I would have thought Tut did it than me actually thinking he did it. Because remember during our interview, I told you that, if it was Tut, because I had this because I knew him or knew of him and been in his presence several times, he probably wouldn't have shot me if I was with Pac that night. And I said that because there was a level, even then, during that first interview, there was a level of respect for Tut that I had going back all the way to 1983 when we first met. We first met in 1983 on Rikers Island. And there was a level of respect that I had from him ever since then. So I kind of didn't want to believe that he shot my cousin. And now that I know he didn't shot my cousin, to be honest with you, I feel much better. And then on top of that, the man that he's become, this guy, man, that wants to be of service to other people. Like I said, I want to be his friend. So, Tut, we already talked, man, but God bless you. God bless your wife, man. I wish you the best. You keep doing what you're doing, man.
I got a question for you. And this because a lot of times, like you said, the person who had told you that you were in prison with, did Tut say anything about even knowing Tupac, being around Tupac back at that
No,
time?
he did say, well, he talked about that in the interview that I was sharing with you, uh, that I watched. In it, he said that he'd never seen Tupac before, which I believed after hearing it from him. He'd never been around him. He'd never been in his presence. And that he was always an admirer of Tupac, that he thought Tupac can change the condition of the black man in our country. This is what he said in the interview, that he thought that Tupac could have even changed him, that he looked up to Tupac, that he looked up to his mother. In fact, he said that he loved his mother. He loved Afeni, and that he wanted to be a Black Panther when he was young. Before he got in the game, he wanted to be a Black Panther. And the reason why he wore fatigues was because he was influenced by the militant attitude of the revolutionary spirit of the Black Panther Party. He said all this in that interview he did with his wife. I suggest that those who are listening to me now, go to that interview that he done with his wife, where he talks about, not being Tupac's shooter. He said all these things in the interview with his wife, and that even confirmed for me that this man couldn't have possibly shot Tupac. That I was completely wrong. I was wrong, but I wasn't out of pocket. I wasn't out of pocket because, like I said, at the time, that's what I believed. It wasn't out of maliciousness. It wasn't out of anything evil of me saying that about Tut. It was just me getting the wrong information while in jail right after Pac got shot. Same the next day. You know what I'm saying?
On June 15th, 2011, Dexter Isaacs, who was serving a life sentence in prison, confessed in a written letter that he was involved in the 1994 robbery of Tupac. He claimed that Jimmy Henchman paid him $2,500 and let him keep all of the jewelry except one ring in which Jimmy Henchman allegedly kept. Does this explanation sound more plausible to you regarding the shooting of your cousin Tupac Shakur?
Yeah, it does, because, and let me tell you why. At first it didn't, because I didn't know the background story of Dexter Isaac. I thought, when I first heard that, I thought that he was just trying to live off somebody else's shine. I was wrong about that too. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was wrong. You know, I come to understand that, Dexter Isaac wouldn't have a reason to confess to doing something that he didn't do, especially while in prison. Like, who would do that? But in hindsight, I was a bit I was a bit unwilling to accept what he said. But over the years, I came to understand that, it's probably more likely that Dexter Isaac was the actual person who shot my cousin, more so than Tut. And I was slowly coming into the realization that I could have been wrong. But out of stubbornness and other defects, I held on to the belief that it was Tut, you know. Uh, but like I said, man, it was something that there was no way I could have avoided it. There was no way I could have avoided the misunderstanding that I perpetuated, with Tut being Tupac's killer. However, what I can do is, like you so generously mentioned, come on your platform and correct what I said. Try to make sense of the confusion that I created with what I said out of my mouth to my cousin, and offer an apology. And not only an apology, but a way that I can make that shit better, make that shit right. You know, because an apology without action is just bullshit. You know what I'm saying? But an apology with action behind it is what matters. So, and like I said, this is, you guys are just getting the information, but Tut and I discussed this. I've talked to him at least 2 or 3 times since he been home, and we text each other periodically. So we have a relationship. Not a relationship, but we have an understanding. Let me put it that way. We have an understanding. You know what I mean? So I'm cool with that. I'm satisfied with that.